If you're globally mobile with tons of opportunities, you've probably noticed something surprising. While most people hit major life transitions every 10 to 20 years, we experience them every 5 years. Think about it. 2020 wasn't just the pandemic for us. It was a huge turning point that changed how we view success, relationships, and deepened what we want from life. Now, as we enter the new year, we are facing another massive shift. I'm Shane. I help high achievers get clarity and alignment during key transitions using Epiphany Mapping, a fluid, visual thinking method I developed after working across 3 continents and 10 companies. Most of us have tried the usual tools, year-end reviews, vision boards, even bringing OKRs into our personal lives. But these rigid frameworks don't capture the complexity of our experiences. They take days and weeks to complete, yet miss the crucial patterns that actually matter. That's why I created the Best Years Map, a 30-minute exercise you can do on any piece of paper that reveals hidden insights from your peak experiences. By analyzing my most transformative years, 2020 and 2021, I discovered patterns that completely changed how I navigate major life decisions. Today, I'll show you exactly how to use it to create your personalized blueprint for this year and beyond.
I normally do this in my traveler's notebook. This thing is awesome. All you need to start this map is a piece of paper, could be anything, as well as this erasable pen from Pilot Friction. I like to use 0.5 black with a red pen. So this is really good for annotations. 2 pens, black and red. Why should you have erasable pens? Well, it's because these guys turn literally any piece of paper into a whiteboard, which is super helpful when you're epiphany mapping because you're trying to dump your mind onto this piece of paper. Sometimes it gets a little bit messy and you need to move things around. That's why it really helps to have an erasable pen. I will also share with you a few tips, 3 or 4 tips at the end that is going to make this exercise 10 times better for you. Without further ado, let's get into it. I like to start my epiphany maps with a question. For this one, it's what did I do in 2020? Draw a box around the main node. All you have to do is answer that question. Whatever comes to mind. That's the beauty of epiphany mapping, is that it mirrors the way our mind actually works. If you think about our mind, it doesn't work like a novel or a textbook or even writing in journals. It's not one organized thought or sentence leading to the next. It's literally this jumble of emotions and ideas and hopes, and you just want to non-linearly, freely capture it. That's the power of epiphany mapping. What did I do in 2020? First, I actually started my YouTube channel. So these are just whatever came to mind to me at the time. Towards the end, I started traveling a lot more. So I went to Oahu with one of my best friends, Brian. I did what's called the KST, Koolau Summit Trail. So one of the hardest trails in the world. I did a backpacking trip with my friend in New York, Danny. This was in the Adirondacks, stunning. Also did a Denver trip, that was Brian. This trip was really special because it was the first flight that I've ever taken during the pandemic. I also did a solo Oregon trip, and this was really special because it gave me that sense of freedom. After being locked up for so long, my first true travel and then work remote experience. And that was when I realized, holy crap, I can actually be anywhere in the world and actually still make money, progress my career. And speaking of getting locked in, we got all locked in. For me, that was my true monk mode. The structure of work was no longer there, it was taken from us. That's when I started adapting tech project management into life management. So this was when I started implementing the 2-week life sprints and Pomodoro tracking. Basically, I created my own structure out of nothing because I really needed that. This was also the longest time I have ever been single, mainly because I had just broken up with my ex-girlfriend of 3 years. It was a massive crater in my life that actually caused me to start this deep reflection process because I didn't want to carry over, the mistakes that I had made. So I made it a promise to myself that I was going to really go deep and try to figure out what truly drives me, what truly is it that motivates me. During this time, I also picked up journaling. This is something that I had basically never done up until this point. And in retrospect, it was one of the most important things I could have done that carried me throughout the entire pandemic of self-reflection, to the extent that I essentially wrote a book's worth of entries. This is pretty non-linear. I didn't even go in a chronological order. I just went by whatever came to my mind at the time. So that's why the first thing that came to mind was YouTube. That's why you're watching in the first place. A few of these trips that I'd taken with friends or by myself, because those were like such formative experiences, that there's also this recency effect. Things that happen closer to the present, we remember more. However, as I kind of went through it, I realized, dang, the first half of this year was like in complete lockdown during the quarantine. How did that affect me? What did I do in 2020? But also, what did I not do? Now, this is a really, really critical step. Taking the red pen and then just jotting down a few annotations around what are some of the feelings? What are some of the meta lessons? Why are they important? So for YouTube, for example, this was what I would consider ignorance is great. Since when I first started, I was just driven by this desire to be of help to people. There's so much chaos in the world, and I have this tool that I'm sitting on that can actually manage that chaos. Why don't I just like turn my photography camera around and film a series of tutorials? And then throughout my YouTube career, I learned more tactics and strategies and the proper way of doing YouTube. Having a hook, having a great intro, not going past a certain amount of time and stuff. And honestly, that drained so much of the rewarding experiences of YouTube out of me, to the extent that it felt like work and I wasn't even doing that well, to be honest. So I would say ignorance is great. Really, really important. I also realized that Brian was such a big part of my 2020 and as well as 2021 experience. And having a best friend with you during that time, you really realize the value of friendship. I know it sounds very obvious, but sometimes when you get caught up in your careers and stuff, you forget that it's the relationships that make it so worthwhile to be able to share the trials and tribulations as well as the successes and stuff, the wins with your friend. I always say that greatest gift that us human beings can gift each other is to bear witness to each other's lives, and through that derive understanding. I'm just gonna make a new one called Friends. True connectedness. I think that's actually something that's especially important for global high achievers like us, right? Because we have so much global mobility and freedom that sometimes it's difficult to actually grow roots in a particular place. And I think that's why having everything locked down for me allowed me, ironically, to actually start growing some genuine roots with people. Hey there, if you are enjoying this video so far and find it helpful, please hit that like button. It helps me out a lot, gets it out to more people. Without further ado, let's get back into it. All right, that's 2020. As I was creating the what did I do in 2020 map, I realized that 2021 was actually really amazing. Like the following year was absolutely bonkers. I made a separate one right next to it called why 2021 was amazing. A few things here is I quit corporate to become a full-time content creator and entrepreneur. I met Olivia, my best friend, and I also moved up to SF. We had hosted a bunch of these like monthly bonfires to build community. Me, Brian, and Olivia. I also did a lot more overlanding, and I discovered this like really sick meadow in the middle of the mountains that I cannot even share on here because it's a secret place. But it is where I did quite a bit of camping, as well as some of my favorite videos on YouTube. So filming in nature, I discovered was fundamentally amazing for me. I also did a Death Valley trip, also another filming component. Also, 2021, I had a pandemic puppy. His name was Kazi. He was an Australian Shepherd, and I remember walking through the moonlit desert landscape with this cheap dog, and it just felt almost mystical, actually. This is a really cool experience. So Kazi in moonlight. So these are like the major highlights. At this point, what I realized was that there's this like really big connection between 2020 to 2021. The reason why 2021 was such an amazing year was because of what I had done in 2020. I realized that 2020 had basically set me up for 2021. And the great thing about this epiphany mapping is that you can deconstruct, just like how we have deconstructed both years, we can even deconstruct how exactly did 2020 set me up? Right here, we've got YouTube, obviously, because that's what allowed me to even quit corporate. That's what allowed me to do the career switch. And then the journal practice. Because if I didn't have my journal practice, I don't think I could have reached a lot of these same epiphanies. Because when I do my morning routine, my morning journaling practice, it's not just writing, right? It's both a combination of writing as well as mapping. The two together is actually what has allowed me to just go, let's just move to SF, right? Because I think this makes sense. Good friends. And all the trips that I took with my friends, I want to say they really helped me learn to be more vulnerable with them, because I had been essentially going through a pretty tough time leading up to 2020. The end of a 5-year cycle isn't always pleasant. Being honest and vulnerable to my good friends helped me be more authentic on camera. I used to be a very polished, very professional person, and I wouldn't really be able to speak from my heart, right? Really be honest, because you think about it, in the corporate world, you're expected to check your emotions at the door. To be bringing in emotions is considered unprofessional. Obviously, if you do that for most of your waking hours, that's the default mode that you're going to be in. And because of the journaling practices, being locked in, the self-discovery, like being single especially was really, really important for me. It helped me develop not just stronger, but much clearer sense of self, which also allows me to be a lot more decisive, because I know truly why an opportunity or a challenge is suitable for me to tackle. And you can see where this is all going to lead to, because if I had met Olivia, who is a very vulnerable and authentic and truly extremely transparent person, is that if I had approached our relationship with wearing masks, that would not have flown. And then it was a search for good friends and community that made me move to SF. And the fact that I had a solid sense of self helped with that decision a lot faster. At this point, you can already see a ton of emergent type of themes happening. Notice especially the areas where the arrows are originating from. So for example, we've got a lot of arrows coming out from Brian. It means that Brian then is a really big part, especially of the 2020 story. And then Olivia was a really big part of the 2021 story, because so many of the arrows are going into her and then leading out from her. So this is where the arrows and the connections are so important as a pattern detection technique. And then sometimes I actually even also step further back and go, what are some of the meta themes? How did each of the years actually feel, right? So it occurred to me during this time that 2020, despite being locked in, actually had an element or a feel of openness, because the entire world was just slowed down and had a ton of remote freedom. I had the space finally to say yes to things. Leading up to this point, my entire career was driven by planning, right? It was there was no gaps between job switches, international moves, or even relationships. It was just going from one thing to the next the entire time. I didn't really have a lot of stillness. So suddenly having that space to say yes to things I didn't plan, massive. So that's a really cool pattern, is that if I didn't say yes to so many things in 2020, I wouldn't know what to actually focus on, the things that matter in 2021. At this point, you actually have a really solid map of your best years. They could also be on paper the worst years. I mean, on paper the pandemic was awful, but it really depends on who you are and what you did within that challenging time frame. That's what ultimately matters going forward. Here are a few tips that is going to make this map even more powerful for you. What you noticed is I've expanded all the elements, and then I started, doing a meta layer of insights and arrows and all that. This is what I call the annotation layer using the red pen. However, what I like to do to even solidify, make this even more actionable, is to have a section called insights. What this is just a synthesis of this map, something that I can actually take really easy to remember in order to guide my future decisions going into the new year or whatever new big life cycle that I'm about to enter into. In order for me to actually done so well in 2021, I needed a combo of two things actually. Combo of solo time and social time. I can't just be by myself all the time or social all the time, but there is a sequence to it, is that I had to be solo first. The longest time I've ever been single. The solitude of the pandemic and the lockdown before entering into social, before entering into trips with friends, new relationship, new city, all of that. So solo and social. Not only that is, what does that solitude provide me? Well, it provided me with the space to actually say yes and find myself and know what was truly good for me at the time. Number 2, social. Not only am I going to say yes to everything towards the end, I was also very selective, right? I didn't just like go hit up any rando and go, hey, let's just hang out for the sake of it. I was very selective with it. I was like, who are actually the best people in my life during this life stage of transitions that I can actually go and just stay with, because they either have a grounding factor, history with me, so they understand me, where I'm coming from, and what's the best for me without the judgment. Because the worst thing that you can do during transition times is actually be judged for not knowing exactly what it is that you want in the next couple steps. That actually gets in the way of real, true progress. And what's going to happen is you're just going to repeat the same patterns over again. Trust me, I've been there. Number 2 is in 2020, the openness year, I had no plan. These were actually all the contributors to my YouTube success, because I never expected to get like, tens of thousands of followers from just a few videos. All I wanted to do was post a few useful tutorials, and that was it. No plan, no expectations, hopeful to be helpful. All right, so these are the 2 insights that I have distilled in order to inform my future decision making around, let's say, either be it content or how I want to spend my time. Now that we got these 2 insights, right, we don't need more than 2, by the way. If you can even get 1 core insight from this entire map, you are winning. The reason why I say that is because life is just a big series of decisions. If these are fundamental values that you have distilled from this, this exercise, that means it's going to be helpful in like 1,000 decisions. For example, as I'm going through this like huge life change right now, I just my natural instinct is to just like, I want to distract myself, right? I want to have fun. I want to go out. I want to just like say yes, whatever. That's important, and that will come. However, based on what I have just discovered about myself is that I need that solo space. I need to be single for a while, and I need to just, create that space in my life to lean into the things that make me me. And that's the thing with Global High Achievers, is that every 5 years, we actually change quite a bit. If we continue on this, like what I call the momentum treadmill, we're gonna seem like we're making a lot of progress on paper, but we're gonna feel like we're running in place. So much better to slow down, reflect, figure out some of these key lessons, and then really like integrate the last 5 years worth of experiences. Otherwise, life goes by way too fast. It's like on 10x speed. The second tip that I want to offer is, make a mess. Just look at this. It looks like spaghetti, right? And I didn't even go chronological order. The best thing you can do with epiphany mapping, especially when you first start, is don't care about the order in which you go about things. Epiphany mapping can also be an emotional exercise, because it is whatever resonates with you in your memory first and your thoughts. That's what you're going to put down. And you can put it down in any particular sequence. It doesn't really matter. Which brings me into my 3rd tip. Give yourself some space. By the time that I got to mapping 2 years on just a tiny traveler's notebook, 2 full spread even, is that the more skilled you are at mapping, the less space you need, because the composition and arrangement. The way that I like to think about this is the more skilled you are at mapping, the less surface area you need, and the less skilled you are, the more area you need. And this is because when you first start, you don't really know where things are going, and don't worry about it. Don't let the process get in the way of progress, right? You're trying to get to new epiphanies at the end of the day. That's why it's called epiphany mapping. Jot down all your thoughts in the order they come, and if you have a new major train of thought, start a new node, like a completely new map like I did, right? I started with 2020, but then I ended up with 2 maps with 2021, because these 2 are inextricably connected, but also separate in their own parts. And we're able to capture all these connections using these 2 maps. So give yourself that space, like legal size paper or something if you want to. The 4th, final, and probably one of the most important tips is actually to listen to music while you're doing this, and not any kind of music. What I'm talking about is music that reminds you of those years. So for me, I had my Spotify 2020 and Spotify 2021 playlist. Those were awesome because I was instantly teleported back to those years. There are particular songs that I know that I was listening to as I was dealing with my breakup. There are songs that I've listened to on the road trips up to Oregon as I was running these intensive life sprints. The music component makes this far more engaging, more fun, more emotional, because at the end of the day, this is far more than year-end planning. This is actually life planning through reflection. And especially for these big life cycles, it's a heavily emotional thing. If you don't feel some ounces of fear, as well as a big dose of excitement, then you might want to check yourself. Because at the end of the day, we want to have equal parts logic and analytical, as well as EQ, right? That emotional intelligence as well. That's what makes life fun, both meaningful, fun, but also really productive. That's why I created this 30-minute masterclass specifically for global high achievers who are going through these, big life shifts that combines everything that I have learned so far in the various different transitions I've gone through professionally, personally, and I've distilled them down into a 3-step system. You can watch it for 100% for free with the link below. I'm Sheng, and I will talk to you guys later.